My husband drove me to the clinic that Tuesday morning like he was dropping off dry cleaning. Quick kiss on the cheek. Didn't walk me inside. Didn't even put the car in park. 3 hours later, a nurse I'd never met grabbed my wrist in a hallway and whispered, "Don't let them admit you. Come with me right now." I'm standing in my classroom at Riverside Elementary right now, watching 22 third graders color maps of the United States. The January sun cuts through the blinds in long gold strips. My wedding ring is in a sealed evidence bag somewhere in the Phoenix Police Department. And I can still see the exact way my husband smiled that morning when he handed me my coat and said, "This is going to fix everything." He wasn't lying. He just meant something different by fix. 6 months ago, my husband gave me a gift that was supposed to end my life. Let me tell you how I figured it out. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I teach second grade, third grade now. I got the promotion in October at Riverside Elementary in Mesa, Arizona. I married my husband Daniel on April 7th, 2018, at a small vineyard outside Sedona. My maid of honor was my best friend, Priya. My parents flew in from Cincinnati. Daniel's side was bigger, louder, full of cousins who danced badly and toasted often. For 4 years, it was good. Not perfect, but good. Then my grandmother died in February 2022 and left me everything. Her name was Ruth. She'd never married, never had children of her own, and spent 53 years as a pharmacist in a small town in Ohio. She drove a 2009 Honda Civic. She clipped coupons. She ate the same oatmeal every morning. And when she died at 81, quietly, in her sleep, she left behind a savings account, 2 paid-off investment properties, and a life insurance policy that together totaled $1.4 million. To May, her only grandniece, the one who called her every Sunday. Daniel handled the paperwork. That was the first thing he offered to do when I got the call. I was sitting on the kitchen floor crying, barely able to speak, and he said, "I'll take care of all of it. You don't have to think about a single number. Just grieve." I loved him for that. I handed him everything. I want to be clear about something, because I know what you're thinking. I wasn't naive. I was devastated. There's a difference. My grandmother had been the steadiest person in my life. She sent cards for every birthday, every report card, every small accomplishment. She called me her girl. When she died, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't grade a single paper without crying. Daniel stepping in felt like love. That's what manipulation looks like from the inside. It looks exactly like love. The changes started small, so small I almost can't point to when they began. By May 2022, Daniel had left his job as a project manager at a construction firm. He said he was starting his own consulting business. He had a website, business cards, a dedicated phone line. It all looked real. I was too foggy with grief to question the fact that I never saw a single client meeting or a single deposit hit our joint account. By September, I noticed the credit card statements stopped appearing in the mail. He said he'd gone paperless. Easier to track, he said. Better for the environment. By January 2023, I asked to see the investment accounts where my grandmother's money was held. He sat me down at the kitchen table with a folder full of printed statements, numbers, graphs, quarterly returns. Everything looked official. I didn't ask why the account name was a shell company I didn't recognize. I didn't ask why my name wasn't listed as account holder. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man who'd held me while I sobbed on our kitchen floor was the same man managing everything carefully. I was wrong. The first crack happened on a Wednesday in March. I came home early from school, a half day for parent-teacher conferences, and found Daniel on the phone in the garage. He had his back to the door. His voice was low and clipped, the voice he used when he was cornered. "She doesn't know," he said. "She trusts me. Just give me until June." I stood in the doorway. He turned, saw me, and his expression just for a fraction of a second went cold. Then the smile came back, warm and easy, like pulling on a jacket. "Client," he said before I could ask. "Deadline issue, nothing serious." I said okay. I went inside. I stood in the kitchen and told myself it was nothing. But I started paying attention after that. I noticed that he checked the mail before I got home. I noticed that he answered his phone in the garage. Always the garage. Anytime a certain number called. I noticed that we hadn't had dinner with my friend Priya in 4 months. always a last-minute cancellation, always Daniel's idea, always framed as exhaustion or scheduling. I noticed that in February, he'd added a name I didn't recognize to our health insurance plan. When I asked, he said it was a contractor who needed coverage temporarily. A tax thing, he said. I let it go. The second crack happened in April. I found a receipt. It wasn't hidden, just tucked in the pocket of his jacket when I was taking it to the dry cleaner. A dinner receipt from a restaurant in Scottsdale. April 14th. 2 people. Steak, wine, a shared dessert. $287. April 14th was a Tuesday. Daniel had told me he was in Tucson for a client meeting. I put the receipt back in his pocket. I dropped off the jacket. I drove to school and taught 22 children the difference between fiction and nonfiction, and I thought about the difference between those two things for the rest of the day. I didn't confront him. I know that sounds strange, but something had shifted in the 2 years since my grandmother died, something I didn't have a name for yet. I had stopped recognizing myself in this marriage. I didn't fight anymore, didn't push back, didn't ask questions, and I didn't fully understand why until later, when a counselor named Dr. Patricia Osei would explain coercive control to me in a way that made the last 2 years suddenly make terrible sense. But that was later. In April, I just went quiet and started watching. In May, Daniel suggested I see a doctor. He'd been bringing it up for weeks, casually at first. You look tired, Claire. You haven't been yourself. Are you sleeping enough? I thought it was concern. I was tired. The school year was winding down. I'd been waking up at 3 a.m. with racing thoughts, and I'd had 2 migraines in April that had never fully lifted. He made the appointment himself. He called it a wellness check. He chose the clinic, a private practice in Gilbert called Sunrise Behavioral and Wellness. He drove me there, walked me to the door, handed me my insurance card. They'll take great care of you, he said. He kissed my cheek. He left. Inside, the intake coordinator was a woman named Sandra, mid-40s, efficient smile, clipboard ready. She already had my paperwork filled out. Name, date of birth, insurance, reason for visit, patient experiencing anxiety, sleep disturbance, possible depressive episode, husband referred. I didn't remember agreeing to that description, but I was tired and it didn't feel entirely wrong, so I signed. The doctor I was scheduled to see was a Dr. Mercer. I waited 40 minutes. The waiting room was clean, quiet, a little too quiet, classical music through a speaker. A single window, frosted glass. I was still sitting in the waiting room when a nurse came to refill the water station near the chairs. She was young, late 20s, with dark hair and the kind of focused expression that belongs to someone always thinking 2 tasks ahead. Her badge read Nadia. She glanced at the clipboard on her cart. Then she looked at my intake form in the plastic slot by the wall. Her hand still. She looked at me, then at the form, then at me again. She walked to the front desk, said something quiet to Sandra, and came back. Can I ask your name? Claire, I said, Claire Hartley. And your husband's name? Something about the way she said husband made the hairs on my arms stand up. Daniel, I said. She set down her clipboard. She crouched slightly so we were eye level, the way you do when you don't want to be overheard. I need you to come with me. Right now. Don't sign anything else. I stared at her. Is something wrong with my paperwork? Yes, she said. But not in the way you think. She walked me past the front desk, through a door marked Staff Only, down a short hallway, and into a break room with a folding table, a coffee maker, and a window overlooking a parking lot. She closed the door. I recognize your husband's name, she said. 3 weeks ago, I flagged an unusual consultation request at this clinic. A man named Daniel Hartley called asking about inpatient psychiatric admission protocols. He described a wife with anxiety and sleep problems and asked specifically how long an involuntary hold could be extended. He asked what dosage thresholds were required for certain medications. He asked whether a spouse could be listed as the sole emergency contact and whether that contact could make medical decisions for an admitted patient. The room went very still. He was pretending to ask for general information, she said, but the questions were too specific, too procedural. I flagged it to our clinical director. He didn't take it seriously, but I kept the notes. I couldn't speak. The intake form you signed, she continued, includes a clause authorizing the attending physician to recommend residential treatment if clinically warranted. Dr. Mercer, the doctor scheduled for your appointment, is not on our primary staff. He was brought in for today only, authorized by your husband's referral. What are you saying? Her eyes were steady and full of something that wasn't pity but was close to it. I'm saying I don't know your full situation, but I know what those questions sounded like. And I know that if you go into that appointment and Dr. Mercer recommends admission, the paperwork you already signed gives them significant authority to hold you. The coffee maker beeped. Neither of us moved. My husband, I said slowly, he made this appointment. Yes. He chose this clinic. Yes. I thought about the garage phone calls, the receipts, the missing credit card statements, the investment accounts I'd never actually verified. Is there a life insurance policy? I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine, that pays out if a person is incapacitated? If a spouse is declared mentally unfit to manage their own affairs? Nadia looked at me for a long moment. That's not my area, she said, but you should find out. She gave me her personal cell number. She walked me out through a side exit. She told me to call someone I trusted and to not go home yet. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 11 minutes. Then I called Priya. Priya Anand had been my best friend since we were assigned as roommates in a freshman dorm at Arizona State. She was a paralegal at a family law firm in Phoenix. She answered on the second ring. I need you to tell me if I'm crazy, I said. You're not crazy, she said before I'd told her anything. Talk. I told her everything. The receipt, the phone calls, the clinic, Nadia, the intake form, the phrase, sole emergency contact, and what it might mean. There was a long silence. Claire, Priya said, don't go home. Come to my office, right now. I drove to her office in Central Phoenix. She met me in the lobby. She had already pulled up 3 things on her computer by the time I sat down. Arizona law on involuntary psychiatric holds, the clinic's registration details, and the name of a financial investigator her firm worked with named Carlos Reyes. Carlos was at her office within 2 hours. He was 50, quiet, with reading glasses on a chain and the methodical energy of someone who had spent decades following money. He asked me a series of questions, each one more careful than the last. With my permission, he pulled what public records he could access immediately. He called me at 7:14 that evening. I'm going to walk you through some numbers, he said, and I need you to stay calm. I gripped the edge of Priya's conference table. Okay, the investment account your husband showed you statements for is registered to an LLC called Horizon Wealth Partners. That LLC was dissolved in November 2022. The account has been empty since January 2023. The room tilted. Your grandmother's estate, he continued, was transferred in full to a brokerage account in Daniel's name only. Between April and December 2022, he made a series of withdrawals. The current balance is approximately $11,000. He told me it was invested, I heard myself say. He showed me statements. The statements were fabricated, Carlos said. I've seen this before. It's not difficult to mock up a convincing quarterly report. How much is gone? Approximately $1.38 million. I didn't cry. I think I was past the place where crying was possible. There's more, Carlos said. Your husband took out a life insurance policy on you in March 2022, 1 month after your grandmother's estate transferred. The policy is for $2 million. He is the sole beneficiary. The payout conditions include death, and he paused permanent incapacitation, rendering the insured unable to manage personal or financial affairs. There it was. That was the word. Incapacitated. If I were admitted to a psychiatric facility, I said, if I were declared unable to manage my own affairs, he would have full legal control over your assets and would likely be positioned to collect on the policy, Carlos said quietly. Combined with the remaining estate funds under his control, we're looking at a significant financial motive. I set the phone on the table. Priya looked at me. I looked at the window. Outside, the Phoenix evening was orange and quiet and normal in a way that felt obscene. He didn't want me dead, I said. He wanted me gone, locked away, labeled, stripped of my legal standing, alive but invisible. Priya reached across the table and took my hand. We need to call the police, she said. We met with Detective Sandra Yuen of the Phoenix Police Department Financial Crimes Unit at 9 a.m. the following morning. She was 44, sharp, with a short silver streak in her hair, and the particular exhaustion of someone who had heard terrible things told in very calm voices for many years. She listened to everything. She asked clarifying questions. She did not look surprised, and that, somehow, was the most frightening thing about her. She contacted Carlos, reviewed his preliminary findings, and opened a formal investigation by noon. The next 72 hours were the strangest of my life. I stayed at Priya's apartment. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't go home. I left my phone on so he could text me, which he did 12 messages over 2 days, ranging from "How did the appointment go?" to "I'm worried about you" to a final message that read, "Claire, please call me. I love you." I read them all without responding. Detective Yuen was monitoring them. On the second day, the detective called me into the precinct. "We've subpoenaed his financial records," she said. "I want you to see something." She turned her laptop toward me. A spreadsheet, highlighted rows, dates. "In August 2022, your husband wired $40,000 to an individual named Marcus Tillman. Mr. Tillman has 2 prior fraud convictions. He is currently the owner of record of the LLC that controls a network of shell companies your husband used to obscure the movement of your grandmother's estate." My hands were flat on the table because they had nowhere else to be. In January of this year, Detective Yuen continued, "Your husband paid $8,500 to a private consultant whose primary service, according to the state medical board complaints against him, is coaching families on how to pursue involuntary psychiatric commitments for unwanted spouses. It's a real practice. We see it more than you'd think, mostly in high-asset divorce situations. The idea is to have a spouse declared unfit, take legal guardianship, and control their assets without the messiness of a contested divorce." "He was going to have me committed," I said. "That's what the evidence suggests. And then he'd control everything. My accounts, my legal decisions, everything." "Yes, and if something happened to you while you were institutionalized, the life insurance policy would pay out." She paused. "Mrs. Hartley, this wasn't impulsive. This was planned over at least 14 months. I thought about Daniel standing at my grandmother's graveside in February 2022, the way he'd held my hand, the way he'd said, 'I'll take care of everything.' He had meant exactly that." "There's one more thing," Detective Yuen said. She pulled up another document, a photograph. A woman, late 20s, dark hair, photographed leaving an apartment building in Tempe. Her name is Ashley. She's been in a relationship with your husband for approximately 18 months. She is currently 4 months pregnant. I pressed my fingers to my mouth. "She has been told," the detective said carefully, "that you are mentally unstable and that Daniel has been trying for years to get you help. She believes she is the one he truly loves. She believes that once you are properly treated, he will divorce you legally and they'll be together." The air in the room was very still. "She thinks he's rescuing her from a difficult situation," I said. "Yes, and he's actually just replacing me." Detective Yuen looked at me steadily. "That's what the evidence shows." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in Priya's guest room and looked at the ceiling and thought about a photograph my grandmother kept on her dresser, the 2 of us at a county fair when I was 7. I'm holding a pink ribbon I won for a 3-legged race with a kid I'd never met before that day. I'm grinning so hard my eyes are shut. Ruth had loved that photo. She said it was proof that I could win races with strangers. I thought, lying there in Priya's guest room, that I was going to need to remember how to do that again. On the 3rd morning, Detective Yuen called at 8 a.m. "We're ready," she said. "He's home. We're going in at 10. Do you want to be there?" I didn't. And then I did. "Yes," I said. We drove to my house. I had to keep reminding myself. My name on the deed in 2 unmarked cars. Priya drove me. Detective Yuen and 2 officers were in the car ahead. A financial crime sergeant named Barrett was already in position at the back entrance. My front yard looked exactly as I'd left it 3 days ago. The potted cactus by the mailbox that I'd bought at a farmer's market. The doormat that said welcome that I'd always thought was a little much. The blue door I'd repainted last summer. Everything the same. Everything entirely different. Yuen knocked. 3 sharp raps. "Daniel Hartley, this is Detective Yuen, Phoenix PD. Please open the door." A pause. Then footsteps. The door opened. Daniel was in a t-shirt and jeans, coffee cup in hand. He looked at Detective Yuen, he looked at the officers, and then he looked past them and saw me. The coffee cup didn't fall. He held on to it. But his face did something I had never seen it do in 7 years of marriage. It went completely blank, like someone had wiped a whiteboard mid-sentence. "Claire," he said, "I was worried about you." "I know you were," I said. Detective Yuen stepped forward. "Mr. Hartley, we have a warrant to search the premises, and I need to ask you to come with us." He looked at me over her shoulder, and I saw it just for a moment, the way the warmth drained out completely, the way his eyes went flat and calculating, running through whatever options he thought he still had. He had none. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. His voice was steady. "Claire has been struggling mentally. She hasn't been herself. I've been worried for months." "Sir," Sergeant Barrett said from behind him, "we're going to need you to come with us now." They walked him to the car. He didn't look at me again. He had already moved on to the next strategy, I could tell, already assembling the story, already calculating. I stood on my own doorstep and watched the car pull away. Priya stood beside me. "You okay?" "Not yet," I said, "but I will be." He was charged with financial fraud, elder estate misappropriation, conspiracy to commit involuntary commitment fraud, and attempted insurance fraud. The conspiracy charge was the serious one. Arizona had recently strengthened its laws around the abuse of involuntary commitment proceedings following a high-profile case in Tucson, and the prosecutor, a woman named Angela Park, treated it accordingly. The trial took place 11 months later in a Maricopa County courtroom. I won't describe every day of it. Some of it I can't describe. There are hours I've put in a room in my memory and locked the door. But I'll tell you the moments that mattered. Victor Reyes, the financial consultant Daniel had paid, took a plea deal and testified for the prosecution. He described, in a flat and businesslike voice, the precise method Daniel had researched for having a spouse committed without their consent. He described the target, a woman who had recently inherited a large sum, who had experienced grief-related depression, who had been gradually isolated from her support system, who had been subtly discouraged from checking her own accounts for 2 years. He described it like a checklist, like a process. I sat in the gallery and listened to my life described as a target profile. Carlos Reyes testified about the fabricated investment statements. He walked the jury through the forgery side by side with real quarterly reports, pointing out the inconsistencies only a forensic accountant would catch. One juror, a man in his 60s who had spent 30 years in banking, leaned forward the entire time Carlos spoke. Ashley testified briefly. She had learned by then what Daniel had told her versus what was true. She had learned that she was not a rescue. She had learned that she was a plan B. She cried through most of her testimony. I felt sorry for her. I didn't stop feeling sorry for her, even though I knew it complicated things for people watching. Grief doesn't follow convenient lines. On the day I testified, the courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the fluorescent light humming above the witness stand. Prosecutor Angela Park asked me to describe the morning Daniel drove me to the clinic. I did. She asked me what I felt in the parking lot when Nadia walked me out through the side exit. I said, I felt like I had been living inside someone else's story for 2 years, and for the first time I could see the cover of the book. She asked me what I wanted the jury to understand. I looked at the 12 people in the box. I looked at Daniel, who was looking at the defense table. I want them to understand that this didn't happen because I was weak, I said. It happened because I was grieving, and I loved someone, and I trusted him, and that is not a character flaw. That is what love requires. He used the best parts of me against me. That's what this kind of abuse looks like. It doesn't look like a villain. It looks like a husband. It looks like someone taking care of you. I paused. I want every person in this room to know the warning signs. Not because I want you to be afraid of love, because I want you to be smarter than I was when it matters. The jury deliberated for 9 days. On a Thursday morning in February, I sat in the gallery next to Priya and held her hand so hard she later showed me the marks. Guilty on all counts. Daniel stood very still when the verdict was read. He didn't turn around. He didn't look at me. He just stood there, and then the bailiff moved, and then he was gone. Outside the courthouse, it was warm for February, a Phoenix kind of winter day, all sun and no apology. Reporters asked questions. I didn't answer. Angela Park shook my hand. Detective UN gave me a short, firm nod that meant more than most speeches I've ever heard. Priya cried. I didn't. I think I had used all my tears on nights in a guest room at 3 a.m. He was sentenced to 12 years. The financial crimes ran consecutively. He would be eligible for parole when he was 56 years old. I filed for divorce from a jail address. It was the most efficient I had ever felt in my adult life. The first months after the trial were not what people expect when they hear the word free. Free is not a feeling, it is a project. You have to learn what you want when no one is managing your answers. You have to relearn the sound of your own instincts. You have to stop bracing for the sound of a car in the driveway. I went back to work in April. My students were 9 years old, and they needed to learn long division, and they did not know or care that my entire understanding of trust had been rebuilt from the studs. That was, it turned out, exactly what I needed. 22 people who needed me to show up and be present and think about things that were not the inside of a courtroom. I started therapy with a counselor named Dr. Osei in March. She was the one who gave me the language I'd been missing: coercive control, financial abuse, isolation as a tactic, the slow erosion of a person's access to their own perception. She said something in our 4th session that I wrote on a Post-it note and stuck to my bathroom mirror. You were not fooled because you were foolish. You were targeted because you were kind. I kept that note for 7 months. Then I took it down because I had stopped needing it to be true from the outside. I could feel that it was true from the inside. In September, I called Nadia. She had left the clinic in July. She'd reported the situation to the state medical board and to a journalist covering healthcare fraud in Arizona. The clinic was under investigation. Dr. Mercer's consulting license had been suspended. She had taken a position at a community health center in Chandler. We had coffee at a place in downtown Mesa. She was exactly as I remembered her. Focused, efficient, the kind of person who operates in quiet competence rather than noise. I almost didn't say anything, she said, looking at her cup. I almost told myself it wasn't my place, that I was overreacting, that I didn't have enough information. What made you act? She looked up. The questions he asked on that phone call, the specificity. Nobody asks those questions out of general curiosity. She paused. Also, I've seen what happens when women go into those rooms and don't come back out the same. I've seen it. I wasn't going to see it again. I reached across the table and took her hand for a moment. No words. There weren't the right ones. I started writing in November. What began as a journal pages of timeline, fragments of memory, the specific details I kept needing to put somewhere outside my own head, became something else by December. By January, I had 230 pages. By March, I had a manuscript. I called it Committed, a title with 2 meanings, which felt right. My literary agent, a woman named Denise Faber in New York, read it in one weekend and called me on a Sunday night. Claire, she said, this is one of the most important books I've read in 5 years. Not because of what happened to you, because of how clearly you explain how it happened. Committed was published the following October. By November, it was on every list I had never dared to put my name near. But the thing I am most proud of is not the book. In January of the year after the trial, I launched the Ruth Foundation, named for my grandmother. Its focus is narrow and deliberate. Free financial literacy resources for women who have been isolated from their own economic lives, and legal guidance for those who suspect a spouse is misrepresenting their assets. We partnered with 3 law firms, a forensic accounting firm, and a network of domestic violence advocates who had been screaming into a void for years about financial abuse and being largely ignored. In our first year, we helped 412 women understand their own financial situations. We helped 61 of them access funds that had been hidden from them. We answered emails from women in 38 states. One of those emails read, "I showed your book to my daughter and she finally understood why I couldn't just leave. She finally stopped asking why I stayed. That was the only thing I wanted. Thank you." I read that email standing at my kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning, and I put down my coffee, and I cried, not because it was sad, but because something my grandmother used to say finally made complete sense to her. Ruth used to say, "The point of surviving is to do something useful with the fact of it." She said it matter-of-factly, The way she said most things, like it was obvious, like it required no elaboration. She was right. It did not require elaboration. I still live in Mesa. I still teach. I have the same best friend, the same potted cactus by the mailbox, the same blue door. I repainted it a slightly darker shade of blue last spring because I wanted to. Not because someone asked me to. Not because anyone would notice. Because I walked past it one afternoon and thought, I'd like that darker, and that thought belonged entirely to me. There is a man I've been seeing for 7 months. His name is Tom. He teaches high school history 2 towns over. He is patient and funny and bad at parallel parking and completely uninterested in managing a single aspect of my life. On our 4th date, I told him the whole story, all of it, and he listened without interrupting. And when I was done, he said, I want to understand one thing. What do you need in a relationship to feel safe? Not what had been done to me. Not what he could fix. What I needed. I cried a little, which I was not expecting. He waited. I told him, and he has, every day since, simply done that. I am not the person I was before Daniel. I am not the person I was during those years of fog and paperwork and slow erasure. I don't know yet exactly who I am becoming, but I know I trust her. I know she shows up. I know she reads her own bank statements every month, checks her own accounts, keeps her own records, and has Priya's number in her hand before she needs it. And I know this. Nadia was in that waiting room because she trusted her instincts. I got out of that parking lot because I finally trusted mine. Whatever you are feeling right now, reading this, if something in this story sounds familiar, if something is pressing against the inside of your chest, the way a name you're not ready to say presses, listen to that. You are not overreacting. You are not too much. You are not crazy. Trust what Ruth used to call your quiet knowing. It is trying to protect you. Survival is not the end of the story. It is the first sentence of the one you actually get to write.